Emily Blair, and today we're going to be starting to talk about argumentative essays. So, an argumentative essay is probably different than a lot of the kinds of papers that you wrote in high school. It can be kind of intimidating at first, but at the end of this, I want to have all of us have a general overview of what we're going to be doing for the rest of the semester, basically. Obviously, we're going to be covering things more in depth. I wanted to give you a good scope of what an argumentative essay is. So, argumentative essays can be based on fact. Right? They're not opinionated essays, they're thesis-driven. So, fact is a big word and it doesn't really mean anything. So, fact can be personal experience. So if you have an experience that you feel strongly about, convictions, which we all have thoughts and opinions about things, that might be a place that you think to start, okay, I can argue this, right? However, just having ideas is not enough to build a whole argumentative essay. You also need research. You need to support your assertions with this research. And we're going to be talking a lot this semester about research, different ways you can go about it. We're going to be going to the library. But first, let's recap a little bit of what we've already been doing. So, the rhetorical situation. This is how we think about any type of media, right? There are rhetorical appeals in advertisements, in movies, in news, all of these kinds of things. So remember, you're at the top, you're the author, and you can exert ethos or your credibility. So if you're working off of personal experiences, this isn't very hard, right? I've witnessed this thing in my town, I've thought about this issue on campus, and I think it's a problem. You have some credibility. If I was asking all of you to write a paper about something on campus, you're all here, you'd be able to easily talk about that. If I asked someone who had never been on campus to write about an issue that we have here or something that we could improve in our communities, they would need to do a lot more research, right, in order to bump up their ethos and credibility so that an audience would believe them, which is our second point. The audience is the second piece of this triangle, right? And you can exert and think about pathos or emotional appeals. So remember, pathos doesn't always mean an appeal to action or sadness or a call to action or anything like that. This can be any sort of emotion that you're evoking in an audience. So if you wanted to argue, say, downtown needs to have more parks because it's good for the environment, it's good for people's morale. You could talk about the benefits of green space for people with research. You could also invoke a sort of pathos. Don't we all love being outside, being around the trees, having clean air, things like that? And the final piece of the rhetorical situation triangle is your topic, right? So this is what you're actually writing about. And we want to do logical appeals there. So does the topic that you're researching make sense? Is there a rhyme or reason to it? Is your paper put together in a logical way? Can people see the connections that you're making between these different points, especially if you have a broad range of research? How are you bringing that all together to make this argument? Now, of course, there's also everything else. So writing doesn't happen in a vacuum, even though in the classroom sometimes it can feel that way. Remember that you are not writing in the middle of nowhere, right? We have Kairos, or the state of the universe right now. So my favorite example, of course, being the smoking ads from the 1950s. Back then, research wasn't as great, and ads for cigarettes could say, 4 out of 5 scientists recommend Camel, or whatever it was. Now, we all know in the popular imagination, smoking is not healthy for you, and these ads today need to be different. Another way to think about it is place. So culturally, we have certain touchstones, right? There are things that you can put in your paper that might not make sense or translate well to other cultures, other age groups, thinking about audience, thinking about common knowledge is something that a lot of people struggle with. So what is common knowledge? What do you need to look up? Things like that. We also have to think about what medium you're using. So for this, I'm asking you all to write a paper, 8 to 10 pages. If I was asking you to make a 15-minute video, or if I was asking you to, make a collage or a mural or something like that, you would have to think very differently about how you're going to appeal to your audience, what your topic might be, what might be harder to convey in words than visually, and who you are. Can you make a good video? And then finally, let's think about constraints. So these can be the length of your paper. It might be that you only have 2 months to write it. You're not going to write a dissertation in this length of time. It could be that I'm asking you to write in English. All of these things. So this is your paper without any of the stuff in it yet. So in order to convince your audience of something and to be credible and for it all to make sense while you're writing a paper in this class at this time, you need to do research, which is a big scary word that we're going to be talking about a lot. We're going to be going to the library, we're going to be talking about all of these different kinds of sources, how many sources you need to have in a paper, things like that. And for research, people usually think of 1 to 2 things. Either you're Googling something, or you're going to the library in the stacks and sitting there with your nose in a musty book. Both of these things can be valuable. I always like to tell people with research, it's like a Venn diagram if it was very poorly shaped. So, this part of the Venn diagram, which goes all the way into this one, is credible sources. So, a lot of the times, you're going to be writing things in college that only want you to have this part of the diagram, which are scholarly sources. And that is so valuable. That's what we're going to be focused on here as well. However, if you're writing about something in, say, pop culture, current events, if you want to contextualize your argument in today's world, you're going to also need some credible sources, because scholarly sources a lot of the times are 2 months to a year behind, right? And if you want to talk about global warming or politics or any of these sort of up-to-the-minute things, scholarly sources can support your argument, but they won't be able to do everything. So you're probably thinking, what are credible sources? Well, they can be things like news releases from credible sources. So the Associated Press, news releases, things like that. Personal experience can actually be a credible source also. So if you say, I've grown up in Southwestern Virginia and I've seen this problem across the years, probably going to believe you. Also, if you interview people, that can be another credible source. Some documentaries. So there are just a lot of options of credible sources, but you'll notice that most of them aren't scholarly in this really bad Venn diagram, right? And we'll be talking more about the specifics, but I do want you guys to have some credible sources that aren't scholarly, because that research is difficult and it's hard to find things that you can use but that are still respected in a scholarly way. Scholarly sources are a lot easier to define, but they can be harder to find. So the biggest thing with them is that they're peer-reviewed. What that means is that I can't sit down and write a book about, horticulture and have it be scholarly. Other people in the field read these essays or books, critique them, edit them, and send them back for revision. You go over this again and again. Peer-reviewed scholarly work is often found in the library, and either a university press or a university will publish it, or a professional organization. So, for instance, the Appalachian Studies Association has its own journal. If you get published in that, it's a scholarly source because they have readers all over the country in that field who will review it. Scholarly sources, again, we're going to be going over how to find them in the library databases, in the library, physically and online. It's a really valuable skill that you're going to carry throughout the rest of your college career. So, you have all this research, you've thought about your audience, you've thought about who you are as a person, and now you think, I have a shiny, new thesis statement, which is very exciting. A thesis statement is 1 to 2 sentences towards the beginning of your paper that talks about everything else that you're going to talk about. It is your argumentative statement. It is a statement that you garner from all of your research, distill down, and then everything comes under it. You don't want your thesis statement to be too broad, right? You don't want it to be able to house an entire book under it. You also don't want it to be so narrow or so obvious that it feels like a statement of fact, right? So the sky is blue is not a thesis statement, it's just a statement of fact. And it should indicate that you're thinking about multiple different parts of this argument. Now, the way I have to think about this is something I call the paper house. For your thesis statement, everything comes under it and needs to be supported by evidence, both research and otherwise. It's like a roof. Everything comes under it, right? And it makes sense that you want to think about this first. It's pretty, it's large, it's stately. However, you don't start with the roof, right? You start with the ground. And in this long, drawn-out metaphor, the ground is everything else. The ground is Kairos. Or the state of the universe at the time, right? The ground is the constraints that I'm putting on this paper. The ground is all the things that you can't control about where you are writing in. Then we have our foundation. And for us, our foundation is research. You're going to represent this in a citation style, either MLA or APA. If you've never heard of either of those, that's fine. I'll be going over that this semester. But your foundation is showing me that you've gone out, done the work. You're showing your audience. I know what I'm talking about. I have this strong thing that I can rest the rest of my paper on. And your walls and your supports are your supporting paragraphs. All of this holds up your thesis statement. So you can't go over here and build a fun little shed of a sidebar, right? Just because you found a cool book that you wanted to include. You also can't just have one point that supports your thesis, right? This house is going to fall down. The strong paper house will stand up against scrutiny from your audience, right? It will make logical sense. All of these parts fit together in a way that your audience can grasp, easily understood, appropriate, and you'll be convincing. So, I look forward to going through the rest of the semester with you in the argumentative essay.